The winter wind cut through the New Mexico territory like a dull blade, slow and merciless. It rattled the loose planks of the Sullivan cabin, a structure that had seen better days when better days still existed. Emma Sullivan stood at the single clouded window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the grey sky promise more snow. At 9 years old, she had learned to read the weather the way her father once read the earth for signs of precious metal, with careful attention and growing dread. Behind her, Thomas sat cross-legged on the dirt floor near the dying embers of their fire. He was 7, small for his age, with their father's dark hair and their mother's pale blue eyes. In his lap lay the shattered remains of a wooden horse their father had carved 2 winters ago, before the cough that never quite left his lungs, before the mine shaft collapse that took him 3 weeks past. The horse's head had snapped clean off, and one leg dangled by a splinter. "Emma," Thomas said quietly, his voice barely rising above the wind's howl, "do you think Papa knew? About dying, I mean." Emma turned from the window. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by the weak fire and the grey light filtering through gaps in the walls. Their few possessions lay scattered about: a cast-iron pot with a crack running down its side, 2 thin blankets that smelled of mildew, a wooden crate that served as their table, and the leather satchel containing their father's effects, which Emma had not yet found the courage to open completely. "I don't know, Tommy," she said, using the name only she was allowed to call him. She crossed to him and knelt down, her own wooden doll, its painted face worn nearly smooth, clutched in her hand. One of its arms had broken off last week when she dropped it. "I think maybe he knew he was sick. That's why he kept telling us stories about being strong." Thomas nodded slowly, running his finger along the broken edge of his horse. "Jacob Morse said Papa was a fool, said he died chasing dreams in the dark." Emma's jaw tightened. Jacob Morse was the 13-year-old son of the general store owner, a boy with a cruel streak, and his father's disdain for anyone who didn't have money to spend. "Jacob Morse is a bully and a liar. Papa was brave. He was trying to give us a better life." "But we don't have a better life," Thomas said, and the simple truth of it hung in the cold air between them. Emma had no answer for that. Their father, Patrick Sullivan, had come to the territory 5 years ago after their mother died of fever back in Kansas. He'd been a man of big dreams and bigger heart, convinced that somewhere in these unforgiving hills lay a strike that would change their fortunes. He'd filed a claim on a worthless-looking piece of land northeast of the settlement, worked it when he could between odd jobs, and died without finding anything but rock and disappointment. Now the children were alone in a cabin that belonged to them only because no one else wanted it, on land that held nothing but their father's grave and broken dreams. The townspeople of Redemption Bend, a grandiose name for a collection of weather-beaten buildings clinging to existence, regarded them with a mixture of pity and irritation. Orphans were a burden on a community that could barely sustain itself. "We need more wood," Emma said, standing and pulling her thin coat, one of her father's cut down badly to fit, around her shoulders. "The fire's nearly out." "It's getting dark," Thomas protested, clutching his broken horse tighter, "which is why I need to go now." Emma moved to the door where their father's old hatchet leaned against the wall. The handle was worn smooth from years of use. She picked it up, testing its weight. Too heavy for her, really, but she'd been managing. The door opened with a groan, and the wind immediately invaded the cabin, scattering ash from the fireplace. Emma stepped out onto the small porch, such as it was, just a few planks that creaked under her weight. The sun was indeed setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and purple. Their cabin sat at the edge of Redemption Bend, far enough from the main cluster of buildings that they might as well have been alone in the wilderness. To the north she could see smoke rising from the chimneys of the more substantial homes: the general store, the saloon, the assayer's office, the church with its white-painted steeple. All of it seemed impossibly distant, though it was less than half a mile away. To the east lay the hills where her father's claim was staked, marked by a weathered wooden post and a pile of rocks that served as his grave. Emma had not visited since the burial. She couldn't bear to see the frozen earth that held him. She made her way to the small woodpile behind the cabin, where a few pieces of split wood remained from her father's last efforts, not enough to last more than a day or two. Beyond the woodpile lay the scrub forest, twisted pinyon pines and juniper that grew despite the harsh conditions. That's where she'd have to go to find more fuel. Emma had made it perhaps 20 yards into the trees, hatchet in hand, when she heard the sound. A horse's whinny, low and nervous. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Horses meant people, and people this far from town, this late in the day, rarely meant anything good. She crouched behind a thick juniper, peering through its branches. In the failing light, she could make out a figure on horseback, moving slowly along the ridge above her father's claim. The rider sat motionless for a long moment, surveying the land below, then urged his horse forward and disappeared over the rise. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She'd heard stories about claim jumpers, men who swooped in when a prospector died to seize whatever land might hold value. But her father's claim was worthless. Everyone knew that. He'd spent 5 years proving it with his empty pockets and tired eyes. Still, something about the rider unsettled her. She waited until she was certain he was gone, then quickly gathered a few pieces of deadwood and hurried back to the cabin. Thomas was where she'd left him, now trying unsuccessfully to fit the horse's head back onto its broken neck. "I saw someone," Emma said, dumping the wood by the fire and adding a piece to the struggling flames. "On horseback, up by Papa's claim." Thomas looked up, his eyes wide. "Who?" "I couldn't tell. Too far away." Emma knelt beside him, taking the broken toy from his hands. In the better light of the revived fire, she could see that the break was clean, but the pieces were too small for her clumsy attempts at repair. "We need to be careful, Tommy. Lock the door at night." "We always lock the door." "I know, but especially now." They ate their supper in silence, hardtack softened in water, and the last of the dried beans from their father's supplies. Emma calculated that they had perhaps a week of food remaining, if they were careful. After that, she'd have to figure something out. The town had made it clear that charity was in short supply, and their father had died owing money to the general store. As darkness settled fully over the land and the temperature dropped further, Emma banked the fire and laid out their blankets. They slept together for warmth, as they had since their father died, Thomas curling against her like a small animal seeking shelter. But Emma lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind and thinking about the rider on the ridge. She thought about her father's leather satchel, still mostly unexplored, and wondered if there was anything inside that might help them. She thought about the town of Redemption Bend and its cold eyes, about the general store owner who'd told her just yesterday that he'd be wanting his money soon, one way or another. Most of all, she thought about the broken wooden horse in Thomas's hands and her own armless doll, and how everything in their lives seemed to be falling apart faster than she could hold it together. She must have eventually slept, because she woke to Thomas shaking her shoulder in the grey light of dawn. "Emma," he whispered urgently, "there's someone outside." Emma sat up quickly, her heart racing. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see movement. Someone was definitely out there near their woodpile. She grabbed the hatchet and moved to the window, positioning herself where she could see without being easily seen. The figure was crouched by their meager supply of firewood, but he wasn't stealing it. He was adding to it. As Emma watched in disbelief, the man, and she could see now it was a man though his back was to her, placed several split logs carefully on their pile. He moved with quiet efficiency, making almost no sound. When he straightened and turned slightly, Emma's breath caught. Even in the dim morning light, even from behind, she could see what he was. His long black hair hung loose past his shoulders, and he wore buckskin leggings and a vest despite the cold. His skin, what she could see of it, was copper dark, an Apache. Emma had seen Apache before, though usually at a distance. The territory's history was soaked in blood from the conflicts between settlers and the tribes that had lived here long before any white man dreamed of gold or land. The wars were mostly over now, the Apache confined to reservations, but tensions remained high. Just last month, a rancher had been killed in a dispute over stolen cattle, and the town had buzzed with angry talk of savages and vengeance. The man finished with the wood, and then did something that made Emma's grip on the hatchet falter. He removed something from a pouch at his belt. She couldn't see what, and placed it carefully on top of the woodpile. Then he moved away, silent as smoke, and disappeared into the scrub forest. Emma waited a full minute before she dared to open the door. Thomas crowded behind her, trying to see. "What did he leave?" her brother asked. They ventured out together into the cold morning. On top of the woodpile, wrapped in a piece of cloth, they found two things: a handful of dried meat, carefully prepared, and Emma's broken doll. But the doll wasn't broken anymore. Someone had carved a new arm, fitted it perfectly to the body, and even attempted to paint it to match the faded colors of the original. The work was crude but careful, done by someone who understood that small things mattered. Emma picked up the doll with trembling hands. "Why would he—" "Maybe he's a ghost," Thomas said, his voice a mixture of fear and wonder. "There's no such thing as ghosts," Emma replied automatically, but her conviction wavered. She looked toward the forest where the man had vanished, then at the repaired doll in her hands. Whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he'd given them firewood, food, and something even more precious. A small kindness in a world that had shown them mostly indifference. "Should we tell someone in town?" Thomas asked. Emma thought about how the townspeople would react. She thought about the general store owner's contempt, about Jacob Morse's cruel words, about the way the church ladies looked at them with that particular mixture of pity and judgment. She thought about the rider she'd seen on the ridge, and the cold calculation in how he'd surveyed her father's land. "No," she said finally, tucking the doll into her coat. "We don't tell anyone." That evening, as the sun set and the temperature plummeted again, Emma finally worked up the courage to fully explore her father's leather satchel. Thomas sat beside her as she emptied it piece by piece. There was a pocket watch that no longer worked, a few coins that amounted to almost nothing, a letter from Kansas that Emma couldn't bear to read, and at the bottom, a worn leather journal. Emma opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with her father's handwriting, notes about the land, sketches of the terrain, observations about rock formations and water sources. Most of it meant nothing to her. But on the last page with writing, dated just a week before his death, her father had written something different. "Found color in the eastern shaft. Significant. Need to dig deeper. But the cough is worse. Must be careful. If something happens to me, Emma and Thomas must know the land is worth more than anyone thinks. Don't let them be cheated. The vein runs deep." Emma read the words 3 times, her heart pounding. Found color. That's what prospectors said when they found gold. Her father had found gold, or at least the promise of it, and he died before he could prove it to anyone. She looked up at Thomas, who was already asleep against her shoulder, his broken horse clutched in his hands, despite its uselessness. She looked around their pitiful cabin, at their dwindling supplies, at the cold darkness pressing in from all sides, and she understood, with sudden clarity, why someone might be watching their land. Why a rider might survey it from the ridge as the sun set. Her father's claim wasn't worthless at all. It was the opposite, and that made them, 2 orphaned children with no protection and no power, sitting on something that others would kill for. Emma closed the journal and held it tight against her chest. Tomorrow she would need to think about what to do, how to protect what her father had left them. But tonight, she allowed herself one small comfort. She reached into her coat and pulled out the repaired doll, running her fingers over the new arm that some stranger had carved in the darkness. Whoever the Apache man was, whatever his reasons, he'd shown them more kindness than their own people had, and in a world that seemed increasingly hostile and cold, that strange kindness felt like the only warm thing left. Outside, the wind howled and the snow began to fall again, covering their tracks and the tracks of the mysterious visitor who'd brought them firewood and fixed what was broken. Somewhere in the darkness, Emma knew, both threats and unlikely allies moved through the frozen landscape. She just didn't yet know which would reach them first. The morning after Emma discovered her father's journal entry, she woke to find Thomas's broken wooden horse sitting on the windowsill, fully repaired. The head had been reattached with such skill that the seam was barely visible, reinforced with what looked like rawhide binding wrapped artfully around the neck. The dangling leg had been reset and strengthened. The toy looked almost better than it had when their father first carved it. Thomas discovered it first, his gasp of delight pulling Emma from the thin sleep she'd managed after hours of worrying. He clutched the horse to his chest, turning it over in his hands with wonder. "Emma, look, he fixed it, the man fixed it." Emma moved to the window and peered out at the grey dawn. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in a blanket of white. Near the woodpile she could see tracks, moccasin prints, partially filled with new snow but still visible. The mysterious Apache had come again in the night, close enough to their cabin to leave the toy, and they'd never heard a sound. "We should leave him something," Thomas said suddenly, still clutching his horse, "to say thank you." "We don't have anything to give," Emma replied, though the idea appealed to her. There was something honorable about reciprocating kindness, especially when you had nothing to offer. "We could leave a note," Thomas suggested. "You could write it." Emma considered this. She'd learned to read and write from her mother, back when better times existed, and her father had encouraged her to keep up the practice. But what would she say? And would an Apache warrior even read English? Still, the gesture mattered. She tore a page from the back of her father's journal, careful not to damage any of his notes, and with a piece of charcoal from the fire, she wrote in her careful script, "Thank you for the firewood, and for fixing our toys. We have nothing to give back but our thanks. Emma and Thomas Sullivan. She folded the paper and, with Thomas following close behind, ventured out into the cold to place it on the woodpile where the man had left the doll. The morning air bit at her face, and she could see their breath forming clouds. The tracks led away into the forest, already being erased by wind-blown snow. As they turned to go back inside, a voice called out from the direction of town. "Well, well." The little Sullivan orphans up bright and early. Emma's stomach clenched. She recognized that voice. Cyrus Blackwell. Blackwell came riding up on a large bay horse, his bulk making the animal look smaller than it was. He was a thick man in his 40s, with a face weathered by sun and whiskey, small eyes that always seemed to be calculating odds, and a smile that never reached those eyes. He wore a heavy coat with a fur collar and good leather gloves, the attire of a man who'd found success in a hard land, though Emma had heard whispers about how that success had been achieved. His reputation included accusations of claim jumping, strong-arming, and worse, though nothing had ever been proven in any court. Behind him rode two other men. One was tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet and dead eyes. That was Slade, Blackwell's enforcer. The other was younger, probably not yet 25, with nervous hands and a tied-down revolver. Emma didn't know his name, but she'd seen him in the saloon on the few occasions she'd gone to town with her father. "Mr. Blackwell," Emma said, instinctively moving to place herself between the men and Thomas. Blackwell dismounted with a grunt, his boots crunching in the snow. "Heard about your father. Real shame that. Patrick was a good man, even if he wasn't much of a prospector." The false sympathy in his voice made Emma's skin crawl. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Now, that's not very friendly." Blackwell's smile widened, still not touching his eyes. "I came all the way out here in the cold to check on you children, make sure you're managing all right, being a concerned neighbor and all." "We're managing fine," Emma said. Blackwell's gaze drifted past her to their cabin, taking in its obvious disrepair, the thin stream of smoke from their fire, the poverty that hung over everything like the cold itself. "Are you now? That's good. That's real good. Though I got to say, it seems a hard thing, two children trying to survive out here alone. This is rough country, not fit for youngsters without protection." "We don't need protection," Emma said, though even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. "Well, that's where you're wrong, little girl." Blackwell's voice hardened slightly. "There's all manner of dangers out here. Bandits, wild animals, harsh weather, and then there's the Apache problem." Emma felt Thomas press against her back. "What Apache problem?" she asked, working to keep her voice neutral. "You haven't heard? There's been sightings. A rogue buck, probably escaped from the reservation, skulking around these parts. Folks in town are nervous. Some are saying he might be the same one who killed those settlers over near Silver Creek last spring." Blackwell leaned closer, and Emma could smell tobacco and something sour on his breath. "It'd be real dangerous for you children if he decided to pay you a visit." Emma thought of the moccasin tracks in the snow, the carefully repaired toys, the firewood and dried meat. Whoever their nighttime visitor was, he'd had plenty of opportunity to hurt them and had chosen kindness instead. But she said nothing, keeping her face blank. "Now here's the thing," Blackwell continued, straightening up. "Your father, God rest him, he died owing money all over town. Store credit mostly, but other debts too. And he took out a loan from me last fall, using his claim as collateral. Did he tell you about that?" Emma's heart sank. "No," she said quietly. "Well, he did. $500, to be repaid by spring. That's next month, by the way." Blackwell pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got the agreement right here, signed and witnessed. Now I'm a reasonable man. I know you children can't pay, so I'm prepared to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" Emma asked, though she already knew she wouldn't like it. "I'll forgive the debt, complete and total, in exchange for the claim. The land, the mineral rights, everything. I'll even throw in enough money to get you two on a stage back east, wherever you got family. It's more than fair, considering that claim ain't worth the paper it's filed on." There it was. Emma looked at the document in Blackwell's hand, at his calculating eyes, at the two men behind him who sat their horses like patient vultures. She thought about her father's journal entry. "Found color in the eastern shaft, don't let them be cheated." "No," she said. Blackwell's false smile vanished. "No, the land is ours. Our father left it to us. We're not selling." "You're not selling," Blackwell repeated slowly, as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Little girl, you don't seem to understand the situation. You got no money, no food, no prospects. That cabin's going to fall down around your ears come next storm. And you got debt you can't pay." "We'll find a way to pay it," Emma said, with more confidence than she felt. Blackwell studied her for a long moment, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You know what? I believe you mean that. I believe you actually think you can somehow manage to hold on to that worthless patch of dirt. But let me tell you something about this territory, girl. The land here doesn't care about what's fair or what your daddy might have wanted. It takes what it wants, and it doesn't give anything back without a fight." He remounted his horse with surprising agility for a man his size. "I'm giving you 1 week to think about my offer. After that, I'll be forced to take legal action to recover my loan. And trust me, you don't want that. The law in Redemption Bend is Judge Morrison, and he's a practical man. He'll see that the best thing for everyone is for me to take that claim off your hands. Then you'll get nothing and you'll still be out here freezing." 1 week, Blackwell repeated, turning his horse. "Think about it real careful. Come on, boys." The 3 men rode off toward town, and Emma watched them go until they were small figures in the white landscape. Her hands were shaking, and not from cold. Thomas tugged at her coat. "Emma, what are we going to do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But we're not giving up Papa's claim, not to him." They went back inside, and Emma spent the next hour trying to make sense of her father's journal. The entries were technical, full of terms she didn't understand: quartz formations, placer deposits, hydrothermal alteration. But one thing was clear: her father had found something. The question was whether it was enough to matter, and how she could prove it without the knowledge or resources to work the claim herself. The day passed slowly. Emma tried to make their meager supplies stretch, boiling the last of the beans with melted snow to make a thin soup. Thomas played quietly with his repaired horse, creating elaborate stories about adventures in wild lands, his child's imagination a temporary escape from their desperate reality. As evening approached, and Emma prepared to venture out for more firewood, she noticed something that made her pause. Their note was gone from the woodpile. In its place sat a leather pouch. Emma picked it up with trembling hands and loosened the drawstring. Inside was dried meat, more than they'd received before, along with something else. A small carved figure, roughly the size of her palm, depicting a horse similar to Thomas's toy. But this one showed a rider, an Apache warrior with long hair and detailed clothing. The craftsmanship was remarkable, every line deliberate and purposeful. Beneath the carving lay several pieces of kindling, perfectly sized for their fire, and at the very bottom, something that made Emma's breath catch. A piece of paper, and on it, drawn in charcoal, a simple picture. It showed their cabin, smoke rising from the chimney. Surrounding the cabin, sketched with quick strokes, were 3 figures on horseback, clearly Blackwell and his men, though the artist had caught something sinister in their posture. And in the trees nearby, almost hidden, a single figure stood watch. The message was clear. Their mysterious benefactor had seen the morning's confrontation. He knew they were being threatened. And somehow, despite the dangers facing him as a lone Apache in hostile territory, he was watching over them. Emma showed the drawing to Thomas, whose eyes went wide. "He's protecting us," her brother said with the absolute certainty of a child. "Maybe," Emma said, though she felt it too. That strange sense that they weren't as alone as they'd believed. That night, Emma made a decision. She took another piece of paper and wrote a longer message, working carefully by the light of their small fire. "Mr. Apache, sir, we don't know your name or why you help us, but we are grateful. Men in town say you are dangerous, but you have shown us only kindness. Our father died and left us his land. The man who came today wants to take it from us. He says our father owed him money, and maybe that's true. We don't know what to do. Our father's journal says he found gold, but we don't understand his notes. If you can help us, we would be grateful. If you cannot, we understand. You have already given us more than we had any right to expect. Thank you for watching over us." Signed, Emma Sullivan, age 9, and Thomas Sullivan, age 7. She folded the note, and when full darkness had fallen, crept out to place it on the woodpile. The cold was intense, and the stars overhead seemed close enough to touch. Emma stood there for a moment, looking out at the vast darkness of the territory, wondering if somewhere in that darkness someone was watching. The next morning, the note was gone. In its place, firewood, neatly stacked, and another drawing. This one showed a different view, the hills to the east where her father's claim lay. An X marked a specific spot, and near it, the artist had drawn what looked like the entrance to a mine shaft. Beside this, he'd sketched something that looked like a warning: 3 men on horses approaching from another direction. Emma studied the drawing for a long time, Was he telling her where her father had been digging, warning her that Blackwell might try to access the mine himself? Both? We have to go look, Thomas said, peering over her shoulder at the drawing. It's too dangerous, Emma replied. If Blackwell's men are watching, but what if there really is gold? What if Papa found something real and that's why Mr. Blackwell wants our land? Emma knew her brother was right. They needed to know what they were fighting for. If the claim was truly worthless, maybe she should take Blackwell's offer, get them both to safety before winter killed them. But if there was something there, something valuable enough for her father to die protecting, then they had to know. Tomorrow, she decided, we'll go at first light. That evening, as they prepared for sleep, Emma heard something that made her heart race. Footsteps on their porch, deliberate and unhidden. Thomas grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with fear. Emma picked up the hatchet and moved toward the door. Before she could reach it, something slid underneath, another piece of leather, this one larger. Emma waited until the footsteps retreated before she dared to open the door. The night was empty, only snow and stars. The leather, when she unfolded it, revealed a detailed map. It showed their land, the terrain features, and the location of what must be her father's mine. But more than that, it showed other things. Paths through the hills, sources of water, places where someone could hide or watch. And around the edges, the artist had drawn symbols Emma didn't understand. Apache markings, she assumed, though their meaning was lost to her. At the bottom of the map, laboriously drawn in charcoal, were words in English. The handwriting was uncertain, the spelling imperfect, but the message was clear. I watch, you are safe, the land is good. Your father was brave man. His spirit walks with honor. Do not trust the white man who wants your earth, he has no honor. When you go to mine, I will follow. You will not see me, but I will be there. Trust this. Below the words, the artist had drawn a symbol, a wolf's head, simple but powerful. Emma read the message 3 times, then showed it to Thomas. Her brother traced the wolf symbol with his finger. He has a good spirit, Thomas said with that strange wisdom children sometimes possess. We can trust him. I think you're right, Emma said softly. She wrote one more note before sleep, brief and to the point. We will go to the mine tomorrow morning. Thank you for watching over us. We trust you. Emma and Thomas. She left it on the porch, weighed down with a rock against the wind, and went back inside. As she banked the fire and arranged their blankets, Emma felt something she hadn't felt since her father died, a small flame of hope. They were still in terrible danger. They still had almost nothing, but they weren't alone anymore. Somewhere out in the frozen darkness, someone was watching over them. Someone who asked for nothing in return, who moved like smoke through the night, and who had chosen to stand between 2 orphaned children and a world that wanted to swallow them whole. Emma didn't yet know his name or his story. She didn't know what had brought him to this place or why he'd chosen to help them, but she knew with absolute certainty that the Apache warrior with the wolf symbol was the only ally they had. And tomorrow, when they ventured to their father's claim to see what he'd died protecting, that ally would be watching, unseen but present. A shadow protector in a land where shadows often concealed death rather than deliverance. Thomas fell asleep quickly, his repaired wooden horse clutched in one hand and the carved figure of the Apache warrior in the other. Emma lay awake longer, listening to the wind and thinking about gold hidden in darkness, about men who took what they wanted without honor, and about the strange twist of fate that had brought an Apache warrior to their woodpile on a frozen night. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering tracks and secrets alike, and somewhere in that white silence, Emma knew, a man with no reason to care about 2 white orphans kept his vigil. The morning would bring answers, she hoped, but it would also bring danger. Blackwell wouldn't wait long to make his move, and whatever her father had found in that eastern shaft, it was valuable enough to kill for. Emma touched her father's journal, tucked safely under the blanket beside her. We won't let them cheat us, Papa, she whispered into the darkness. I promise. And in the morning, when first light broke over the frozen land, they would go to the mine. They would see for themselves what their father had died protecting. And their shadow protector would follow, invisible but faithful, just as he'd promised. The game was beginning in earnest now, a dangerous game of claim and counterclaim, of greed and honor, of a world where white men's law and Apache justice existed in uneasy parallel. Emma and Thomas were small pieces in that game, easily overlooked, easily crushed, but they had one advantage that Cyrus Blackwell couldn't anticipate and couldn't understand. They had someone watching over them who owed them nothing, but gave them everything. Someone who moved through the world like a ghost, who understood this land better than any settler, and who, for reasons of his own, had decided that 2 orphaned children were worth protecting. Tomorrow would tell whether that protection would be enough. Emma and Thomas set out for their father's claim just after dawn, when the sky was still more grey than blue, and the air held that particular stillness that comes before the land fully wakes. Emma carried the hatchet and her father's journal, while Thomas held tight to both his wooden horse and the carved Apache figure. They wore every piece of clothing they owned, layered against the cold that bit through fabric and found skin. The walk to the eastern hills took nearly an hour, their short legs struggling through snow that sometimes reached Thomas's knees. Emma followed the map their mysterious protector had drawn, checking the landmarks. A lightning-struck pine, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a crouching bear, a frozen creek bed that wound through the landscape like a scar. "Do you think he's really watching us?" Thomas asked, his breath coming in small clouds. Emma looked around at the empty landscape. Hills rolled away in all directions, covered in snow and dotted with dark patches of juniper and pinyon. She saw no movement, heard no sound except the crunch of their own footsteps and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. But she remembered the note, "You will not see me, but I will be there." "Yes," she said, "I think he is." They found their father's grave first. The pile of rocks Emma had helped the men from town stack over his body. The crude wooden cross bore his name, carved by a circuit preacher who'd happened through Redemption Bend the day after Patrick Sullivan died. Emma paused there, placing her hand on the cold stone. "We're going to save your claim, Papa," she said quietly. "We're not going to let them take it." Thomas placed his wooden horse at the base of the cross, then picked it up again quickly. "Sorry, Papa. I need to keep it, but I thought about giving it to you." From the grave, they could see the mine entrance about 50 yards further up the slope. It was partially hidden by an overhang and some scrub, which explained why it wasn't visible from a distance. Someone would have to know exactly where to look, or have a map drawn by someone who'd been watching very carefully. The entrance was a dark mouth in the hillside, shored up with timber that Patrick Sullivan had hauled and placed himself. A few tools leaned against the rocks nearby, a pickaxe with a broken handle, a shovel, a rusted pan for testing ore. Snow had drifted into the entrance, but not deeply. Emma pulled out the journal and found the entry about finding color. Her father had sketched a rough diagram showing the shaft going back about 30 feet, then turning east. He'd marked the spot where he'd found the promising vein with a star. "Stay close to me," Emma told Thomas as they approached the entrance. The mine was cold and dark, but not as dark as Emma had feared. Light filtered in from the entrance, and once her eyes adjusted, she could see well enough. The walls showed pick marks where her father had laboriously carved his way into the earth. The ceiling was low. Emma could stand upright, but a grown man would have to stoop. They followed the shaft back, Emma counting steps to match her father's notes. 28, 29, 30. Here the tunnel turned sharply east, just as the diagram showed. And here the character of the rock changed. Even Emma, with no knowledge of geology, could see the difference. The stone showed streaks of quartz, bright even in the dim light, and running through the quartz were darker veins that glittered when they caught the light. Emma knelt down and ran her hand along the wall. Her father had been working this section when he died. Fresh tool marks showed where he'd been chipping away at the rock. And there, at eye level, was something that made her heart race. A section of exposed vein, maybe a foot long and several inches wide, where the gold was clearly visible. Not just traces or dust, but actual gold, woven through the quartz like metallic threads. "Is that it?" Thomas asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Is that what Papa found?" "Yes," Emma breathed. "That's it." She understood now why her father had been so secretive, why he'd kept working the claim despite years of disappointment. He'd finally found what he'd been looking for, but he'd been sick, his time running out, and he'd never gotten the chance to extract enough to prove his claim or pay his debts. He'd died knowing he was sitting on a fortune, but unable to do anything about it. A sound from outside the mine made both children freeze, voices and the whinny of horses. Emma's blood went cold. She grabbed Thomas's hand and pulled him deeper into the tunnel, past the turn where the entrance couldn't be seen. They pressed themselves against the cold rock wall and waited, barely breathing. "Told you the old fool must have found something." That was Cyrus Blackwell's voice, echoing into the mine. "Why else would he keep working this worthless claim? Maybe he was just stubborn," came another voice. Slade, the thin man with dead eyes. "Nobody's that stubborn. He found color, I'm sure of it. Probably didn't have time to extract much before the cough got him, but there's got to be something here. Footsteps crunched in the snow near the entrance. Emma could see shadows moving across the light that filtered into the tunnel. Her hand tightened on Thomas's, willing him to stay silent. "You want us to go in and look?" asked a third voice, the younger man who'd been with Blackwell before. "Not yet, Marcus. If there's anything valuable, it's not going anywhere. And I don't fancy crawling around in a hole that might collapse on my head." Sullivan wasn't much for safety. Blackwell's voice was thoughtful, calculating. "No, we'll do this proper. I'll get Judge Morrison to rule on the debt tomorrow. Once we have legal claim to the land, we can work the mine at our leisure." "What about the kids? What about them? They're children. They don't have money for a lawyer, and even if they did, there's no lawyer within 100 miles who'd go against me in Morrison's court. The debt's real, the contract's legal, and by this time next week this claim will be mine." "Seems harsh throwing orphans off their land," Marcus said, and there was something uncertain in his voice. "That's business, boy. You want to make it in this territory. You can't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Besides, I'm offering them passage east. That's more than fair. And if they don't take it, then they freeze or starve or end up in an orphanage. Either way, not my problem." Blackwell's voice grew harder. "The land's what matters. This claim, properly worked, could pull out 20, maybe 30,000 in gold over the next few years. Maybe more." Sullivan was onto something real. "I can feel it." "Boss," Slade's voice cut in. "Tracks here, small ones, fresh." Emma's heart stopped. She'd been so focused on getting to the mine that she hadn't thought about covering their trail. "The kids," Blackwell said, and now his voice held a dangerous edge. "They came up here this morning. Marcus, check the mine." Emma heard footsteps approaching the entrance. In the darkness of the tunnel, she looked around desperately for options. There was nowhere to go. The mine was a dead end. If Marcus came far enough in, he'd see them for certain. Then something happened that Emma would remember for the rest of her life. A sound echoed across the hillside, sharp, high, and distinctly not human. It sounded like a mountain lion's scream, close enough to raise every instinct that told men to seek shelter. The horses outside whinnied in panic. "Christ!" someone shouted. "Did you hear that?" "Mountain lion," Blackwell said, and Emma could hear the forced calm in his voice. "Probably scared off by our horses." Another scream, closer this time. And then another sound, rocks tumbling down the hillside, as if something large was moving through the terrain above them. "That ain't no mountain lion," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "That's close, too close." "Get to the horses before they bolt," Blackwell ordered. The footsteps that had been approaching the mine entrance retreated rapidly. Emma heard cursing, the sounds of men trying to calm panicked animals, and then, amazingly, the receding thunder of hoofbeats as Blackwell and his men rode away at speed. Emma and Thomas waited in the darkness for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. When Emma finally dared to move, she crept toward the entrance and peered out carefully. The hillside was empty. Blackwell and his men were gone, visible only as distant figures riding hard back toward town. But that wasn't what made Emma's breath catch. Standing on a rock outcropping about 30 yards up the hill, silhouetted against the morning sky, was a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin with long black hair that moved in the wind. Even from this distance, Emma could see he held something in his hand, the source of the sounds that had driven Blackwell away, a piece of horn or bone, shaped and carved to produce that terrifying scream. As Emma watched, the man raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or acknowledgement. Then he turned and disappeared over the ridge, with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible. "Was that him?" Thomas whispered, coming to stand beside Emma. "Our Apache?" "Yes," Emma said. "That was him." They emerged from the mine cautiously, but the hillside remained empty. The Apache warrior had vanished as completely as if he'd never been there. But in the snow near the mine entrance, Emma found something that confirmed what she'd seen. Fresh moccasin tracks, and scratched in the snow with a stick, the symbol of a wolf. Below the symbol, words in that same uncertain handwriting. "They know now. Danger is more. Be careful. I watch." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, not from fear, but from overwhelming gratitude. This stranger, this Apache warrior who owed them nothing, had just saved their lives. Blackwell would have found them in the mine, and Emma had no illusions about what might have happened. Witnesses to his illegal survey of the claim, 2 orphans with no one to protect them. The mine shaft ran deep, and accidents happened in mines all the time. "We need to go home," Emma said, taking Thomas's hand. "Right now." They made their way back down the hill, Emma checking constantly for any sign of Blackwell's return. But the landscape remained empty, except for themselves and the tracks they left in the snow. As they walked, Emma's mind raced. She'd seen the gold. It was real, substantial, exactly what her father's journal suggested. But Blackwell knew about it now too, or at least suspected strongly enough to pursue his legal claim with renewed vigor. She had perhaps a day, maybe two, before Judge Morrison ruled in Blackwell's favor. And then what? Even if she could somehow prove the debt was fraudulent, which she couldn't, she had no resources to work the mine herself. She was 9 years old. Thomas was 7. They couldn't extract gold, couldn't process it, couldn't defend their claim against men who would simply take it by force if the law didn't give it to them. But she had one thing Blackwell didn't have. She had an ally who moved like smoke and struck like thunder. An ally who, for reasons she didn't understand, had decided to stand between them and disaster. When they reached their cabin, exhausted and cold, Emma found another package on their porch. Inside was more dried meat, some kind of travel bread, and a deerskin blanket that looked new. Tucked into the blanket was another note, longer than before. "You have seen the gold. It is good, much value, but the white man's law will take it. You cannot fight this with words or papers. The judge will give him what he wants. This I have seen before. White man's law is for white men with power, not for children or Apache. There is another way. In my father's time, before the reservations, we protected what was ours. Not with the white man's law, but with courage and wisdom. The land remembers the old ways, even if white men have forgotten. I will help you if you trust me. But you must be brave. You must do things that will seem strange, maybe frightening. The white man with no honor wants your father's gold. We will give him reason to fear taking it. Tomorrow after dark, I will come to your door. You will see my face. If you trust me still, we will talk. If you do not trust me, I will leave, and you will not see me again. The choice is yours. I am called Neshoba. It means wolf in my language. My people are gone to the reservation, but I am still free. I am still alive. And I remember that protecting the weak from the strong is what makes a man worthy of his name. Think on this. Be ready. Tomorrow night." Emma read the note 3 times, then showed it to Thomas. Her brother looked up at her with those serious blue eyes. "Will you let him come?" Thomas asked. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Papa always said the Apache were dangerous, that they killed settlers and burned homesteads. But he hasn't hurt us. He's been nothing but kind." "I know. And Mr. Blackwell is a white man, and he wants to steal from us." Emma couldn't argue with that logic. She thought about Blackwell's cold eyes, about the way he'd talked about them as obstacles rather than children. She thought about Marcus's hesitation. Seems harsh, throwing orphans off their land, and Blackwell's dismissive response. She thought about the town of Redemption Bend and its cold charity, about the general store owner demanding payment, about the church ladies who looked at them with pity but offered nothing substantial. Then she thought about the repaired toys, the firewood, the food, the warning that had saved their lives this morning. She thought about a man who called himself Neshoba, Wolf, who lived outside the law because the law had destroyed his people, but who still remembered that honor meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "We'll let him come," Emma decided. "Tomorrow night we'll hear what he has to say." That evening, as the sun set and the temperature dropped toward dangerous cold, Emma did something she'd been avoiding. She walked to the edge of town to the small cemetery where permanent residents were buried. Her father wasn't there. They'd buried him on his own land as he'd wanted, but her mother was, shipped there at great expense 5 years ago, when fever had taken her in Kansas. The grave was simple, marked with a stone that read, "Mary Sullivan, beloved wife and mother, 1843-1876. Emma knelt in the snow beside it, brushing away the white powder that covered the marker. "Mama," she said quietly, "I don't know what to do. Papa left us something valuable, but men want to take it. There's an Apache warrior helping us, and I think I'm going to trust him, even though everything I was taught says I shouldn't. Is that wrong? Would you and Papa be angry with me?" The wind was her only answer, cold and indifferent. But as Emma knelt there in the fading light, she remembered something her mother used to say. "Character isn't what people say about themselves, Emma. It's what they do when no one's watching, and there's nothing to gain." Neshoba had gained nothing from helping them. He'd risked his own safety, a lone Apache in territory where his people were hated and feared, to fix toys for 2 white orphans. He'd watched over them, warned them, saved them, all without asking for anything in return. That was character. That was honor. Emma stood up, brushing snow from her knees. "I'm going to trust him, Mama," she said to the grave. "Because he's earned it, and because we don't have any other choice." She walked back to the cabin as darkness fell and found Thomas already asleep, exhausted from their morning's adventure. Emma banked the fire, arranged their blankets, and lay down beside her brother. But sleep was long in coming. Tomorrow night she would meet the man who'd been their shadow protector. She would see his face, hear his voice, learn his story. And together, somehow, they would figure out how to stop Cyrus Blackwell from stealing her father's dream. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The land slept under its blanket of snow, keeping its secrets. The gold in the eastern shaft, the bones of those who died pursuing dreams, the traces of peoples who'd lived here long before any white man thought to call it a territory. And somewhere out in that vast darkness, a man called Wolf kept his vigil, waiting for tomorrow night when the children would make their choice. Trust or fear, alliance or isolation, the old ways or the new law that served only those with power. Emma didn't know what Neshoba's plan might be, but she knew with a certainty that surprised her that she would say yes. They would face whatever came together, a 9-year-old girl, a 7-year-old boy, and an Apache warrior who remembered when honor meant something more than what you could take from those too weak to stop you. The game was changing. The pieces were moving into new positions, and tomorrow night would mark the moment when Emma and Thomas Sullivan stopped being victims of circumstance and became something else entirely. Survivors, fighters, students of the old ways that predated white man's law and would outlast it. Tomorrow night everything would change. Emma finally slept and dreamed of wolves running through snow, of gold glinting in darkness, and of a man with copper skin and dark eyes who stood between her and the cold world like a shield forged from honor itself. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Emma tried to keep busy, mending a tear in Thomas's coat, organizing their meager supplies, reading and rereading her father's journal for any detail she might have missed, but her mind kept returning to the coming night, to the moment when Neshoba would appear at their door, and she would have to look him in the eye and decide whether to trust him completely. Thomas seemed less anxious, playing with his toys, and occasionally asking questions about what the Apache man might be like. "Do you think he's old?" her brother asked at one point. "Like Papa was." "I don't know," Emma said. "From the way he moves, I think he might be younger. Strong, certainly. Will he have war paint? And feathers?" "I don't think so, Tommy. I think he'll just look like a man." Around noon, a visitor arrived from town. It was Reverend Hartwell, the circuit preacher who'd buried their father. He was a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and a worn Bible that he carried everywhere. He knocked on their door gently, and when Emma opened it, he smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Emma, Thomas, I wanted to check on you children, see how you're managing." "We're managing fine, Reverend," Emma said, not opening the door wider. She liked Reverend Hartwell well enough, but she didn't want him inside their cabin where he might see the Apache gifts or ask questions she couldn't answer. "I heard that Cyrus Blackwell paid you a visit, that he's claiming your father owed him money." "Yes, sir." Hartwell's face creased with concern. "Emma, I want you to know that if you need help, the church can—" "We don't need charity," Emma said, more sharply than she'd intended. "We're going to be fine. I understand your pride, child, but pride doesn't keep you warm or fed. If Blackwell takes your claim to court tomorrow, and I've heard he will, you'll have no way to fight him. Judge Morrison is— well, he's a practical man who tends to see things Blackwell's way." "Then the law is wrong," Emma said. Hartwell sighed. "Sometimes it is, Emma. Sometimes it is. But that doesn't change the outcome." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bag. "Here, it's not much, but there's some food in here. Beans, flour, a bit of salt pork, and a few coins. Not enough to pay off any debt, but enough to help you last a while longer." Emma wanted to refuse, but the truth was they needed it desperately. "Thank you, Reverend," she said quietly, taking the bag. "There's something else," Hartwell said, lowering his voice. "There's been talk in town about an Apache, a renegade, skulking around this area. Some folks are saying he's been seen near your cabin. If that's true, Emma, you need to tell someone. You need protection." Emma kept her face carefully neutral. "I haven't seen any Apache, Reverend." Hartwell studied her for a long moment, and Emma had the uncomfortable feeling he knew she was lying, but finally he nodded. "All right, if you say so. But be careful, child. These are dangerous times, and you're very much alone out here." After he left, Emma opened the bag. True to his word, it contained food and a handful of coins. Not much, but more than they'd had. She felt a pang of guilt for lying to the Reverend, who'd shown them nothing but kindness. But the alternative, telling the truth about Neshoba, was impossible. The town would form a posse. They'd hunt him down, and Emma and Thomas would lose the only ally they had. The afternoon crawled toward evening. Emma made a simple meal with some of the Reverend's food, and both children ate in silence, the anticipation of the coming night making conversation difficult. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, Emma built up their fire more than usual. If Neshoba was coming inside, she wanted him to see they were trying to be good hosts, even with their limited means. Thomas fell asleep around 8, exhausted by tension more than exertion. Emma let him sleep, wrapping him in both blankets and adding the deerskin that Neshoba had given them. Then she sat by the fire and waited. The knock, when it came around 9 o'clock, was so soft that Emma almost missed it. 3 gentle taps, a pause, then 2 more. She stood up, her heart hammering, and walked to the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the latch. When she opened the door, Neshoba stood in the starlight. He was not what Emma had expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she'd been expecting. He was perhaps 30 years old, though it was hard to tell. His face was lean and weathered, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that held a depth of experience that seemed far older than his years. His hair hung loose past his shoulders, black as a raven's wing. He wore buckskin leggings and a vest over a cotton shirt that might have been traded from whites, and his feet were wrapped in moccasins that made no sound even on the wooden porch. But what struck Emma most was the expression in those dark eyes, not hostile, not cold, but deeply sad. This was a man who'd seen terrible things, who carried loss like a physical weight. And yet when he looked at her, something in his face softened. "Emma Sullivan," he said, and his English was accented but clear, the words carefully chosen. "I am Neshoba. May I enter your home?" Emma stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Yes, please." Neshoba entered with a fluid grace, his eyes immediately cataloguing everything in the cabin, the sleeping boy, the meager fire, the poverty that couldn't be hidden. He moved to sit cross-legged on the floor near the fire, far enough from Thomas not to wake him but close enough to the warmth. Emma sat across from him, the fire between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Emma studied him openly, trying to reconcile everything she'd been taught about Apache savages with this quiet man who'd fixed broken toys and carved messages in the snow. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are you helping us?" Neshoba looked into the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost musical. "I had children once. A daughter, 8 winters. A son, 5. I had a wife. Her name was Ayana. It means eternal blossom." He paused, and Emma saw his jaw tighten. 3 years passed. Soldiers came to our village. They said we must go to the reservation, leave our lands. My wife said we should go peacefully. She was wise, saw that fighting would only bring death. But some of the young men refused. They fought. He fell silent, staring into the flames. Emma waited, hardly breathing. The soldiers killed everyone who fought. Then they killed everyone who did not fight. My wife, my children, others who'd done nothing but try to live. I was hunting, far from the village. When I returned, he stopped, and for a moment Emma thought he wouldn't continue. I buried them, all of them. Then I swore I would never go to the reservation, never stop being free. Better to die than to live without purpose. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered, the words feeling inadequate. Neshoba looked up at her, and his eyes were wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "For 2 years I lived alone, moved through these hills like a ghost. I wanted to die but could not find the courage. Then one night I saw your cabin, saw you and your brother, 2 children alone, struggling to survive. And I saw my own children in you, saw a chance to do something good instead of just waiting for death." He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out something small, holding it out to Emma. She leaned forward and saw it was a tiny carved doll, worn smooth by handling. "My daughter's," Neshoba said quietly. "I carry it always. When I saw your doll with the broken arm, I remembered her playing with this, remembered her smile, and I thought, perhaps I can still protect children, even if I could not protect my own." Emma felt tears on her own cheeks. She understood now. Neshoba wasn't helping them out of some strategic calculation or expectation of reward. He was trying to save something in himself by saving them. He was trying to give meaning to survival that felt meaningless. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything she had. "For everything you've done for us." Neshoba nodded, tucking the small doll back into his pouch. Now we must speak of practical things. The man who wants your land, Blackwell. He will go to the judge tomorrow. The judge will rule in his favor. This is certain. White man's law does not protect children without power. But the land is ours, Emma protested. My father filed the claim legally. Your father owed money. Blackwell has papers. In white man's law, papers are more important than truth. The judge will give him your land, and there is nothing you can do to stop this in court. Emma felt despair wash over her. Then what do? We make Blackwell fear your land more than he desires it. Emma blinked. How? Neshoba leaned forward, his eyes intent. Blackwell is greedy, yes, but he is also afraid. All greedy men are afraid. Afraid of losing what they have. Afraid of things they cannot control. Your land has gold, but it also has something else now. It has an Apache guardian, and white men fear Apache. You want to scare him away? Not just scare. I want to make him believe your land is cursed, that anyone who takes it wrongly will face Apache vengeance. I want him to think of war cries in the night, of arrows in the darkness, of a ghost who protects what is sacred. Neshoba's voice was calm, but Emma could hear the steel beneath. I have watched Blackwell. He is brave when facing children and weak men, but he is not brave when facing what he cannot see or control. But if you hurt him or his men, the army will come. They'll hunt you down. I will not hurt them, not unless they force me to. I will haunt them, make them see shadows where there are none, make them hear sounds that chill their blood, make them understand that some land should not be taken, some fights are not worth fighting. He paused. And if that does not work, if they still come for your claim, then yes, I will hurt them, because some things are worth fighting for, and children's safety is one of those things. Emma thought about this. It was risky, terrifyingly so. If Neshoba was caught, he'd be killed or sent to the reservation, and if Blackwell's men felt threatened enough, they might come to the cabin, might hurt her and Thomas to get at him. As if reading her thoughts, Neshoba said, I know this is dangerous. I know you are afraid, but doing nothing is also dangerous. If Blackwell takes your land, what will you do? Where will you go? Winter is not yet finished. You have no money, no family, no protection. You will freeze or starve, or end up in an orphanage far from here, separated perhaps forever. He was right. Emma knew he was right. They had no good options, only terrible ones, and slightly less terrible ones. What would you need us to do? She asked quietly. Neshoba smiled slightly, and it transformed his sad face into something warmer. Be brave. Trust me, and when the time comes, tell the story I will give you. A story about spirits and curses and land that defends itself. White men claim not to believe in such things, but in their hearts they are still afraid of what they do not understand. From his pouch he pulled out several items and laid them on the floor between them. A bundle of sage, dried and bound with thin rawhide. Her collection of small carved stones, each bearing Apache symbols. A piece of cloth painted with images Emma couldn't quite decipher. And finally, a necklace made of small bones and beads. These are tools of my people's medicine ways, Neshoba explained. White men see them and think of magic, of curses, of powers they cannot fight. The truth is simpler. They are reminders of our connection to the land, to our ancestors, to the sacred. But Blackwell does not know this. He will see them and imagine horrors. He began to explain his plan. It was clever, Emma had to admit. Neshoba would leave signs around the mine and the claim, Apache symbols, evidence of ceremonies, suggestions that the land was now under spiritual protection. He would make sounds in the night when Blackwell's men came snooping. He would arrange for accidents that seemed like supernatural intervention, tools that went missing, horses that spooked for no visible reason, supplies that disappeared. And Emma would tell anyone who would listen that her father had made a pact before he died, that an Apache medicine man had blessed the land, that anyone who tried to steal it would face terrible consequences. It was half truth and half fiction, woven together into something that might just be believable enough. When Blackwell hears these stories, when his men start to feel afraid, he will have a choice, Neshoba said. He can push forward and risk whatever consequences he imagines, or he can decide your small claim is not worth the trouble. Men like him always choose the path of least resistance, unless they are certain of victory. And if he doesn't scare easily? Emma asked. Neshoba's expression grew harder. Then we will need to be more persuasive. But let us hope it does not come to that. Fighting should always be the last choice, not the first. They talked for another hour, working out details. Neshoba would begin his campaign tomorrow night, after Blackwell had gotten his legal ruling, but before he could act on it. Emma would start spreading her story in town carefully to people who might talk. Thomas would help by being convincingly frightened when adults asked questions, which wouldn't be hard, since he genuinely was frightened. Finally, Neshoba stood to leave. "I must go. It is not safe for me to stay long in one place, but I will be watching, as always. If you need me urgently, tie a white cloth to the porch post. I will see it and come quickly." Emma stood as well, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Neshoba," she said, "that story you told about your family, I'm sorry for what happened to them, and I'm grateful that you turned your grief into something good instead of just giving up." Neshoba looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "Your father raised you well," he said quietly. "You have his courage and more wisdom than your years should allow. You will survive this, Emma Sullivan. Both of you will. I swear it on the graves of my children." He moved to the door, then paused and turned back. "One more thing. The gold in your father's mine. It is valuable, yes, but you are more valuable. Land can be lost and regained. Gold can be spent and earned again, but children are precious beyond measure. Never forget that. No amount of gold is worth your lives." Then he was gone, slipping into the darkness as silently as he'd arrived. Emma stood at the open door for a moment, looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Neshoba was melting into the landscape, becoming one with the night and the cold and the ancient land that remembered his people, even if white settlers chose to forget. She closed the door and went to check on Thomas, who still slept peacefully. Looking at her brother's face, relaxed in sleep and innocent of the dangerous game they were about to play, Emma felt the weight of her choices. She was 9 years old, making decisions that could get them both killed. But what choice did she have? Trust Neshoba and fight, or accept defeat and lose everything? She thought of her father dying too soon, his dream of providing for his children cut short by failing. Lungs and cruel fortune. She thought of her mother, buried in a cemetery far from home. Both of them had fought for their children in their own ways. Both had sacrificed. Now it was Emma's turn to fight, not with guns or legal papers, but with courage and cunning and the help of a warrior who'd lost everything but his honor. She lay down beside Thomas, pulling the blankets close. Tomorrow, Judge Morrison would rule in Blackwell's favor. Tomorrow, legally, they would lose their land. But tomorrow night, Neshoba would begin his campaign. And the day after that, Cyrus Blackwell would begin to learn that some battles weren't won in courtrooms, and some forces couldn't be defeated with money or legal documents. Emma slept fitfully, dreaming of wolves and children, of gold gleaming in darkness, and of a man with sad eyes who'd carved toys for strangers because he couldn't save his own family. When she woke just before dawn, there was a new carving on the windowsill, a small figure of a girl with a determined expression standing beside a wolf. Emma picked it up, running her fingers over the careful details. In the wolf's mouth was a tiny carved flower, eternal blossom, she remembered. Ayana. Neshoba had given his wife's memory to Emma's protection, binding his past grief to their present struggle in a way that made Emma want to both cry and fight with equal intensity. She tucked the carving into her pocket, right next to her father's journal. Today would bring loss, legal, official, stamped by a judge who didn't care about justice. But tonight would bring something else. Tonight would bring war, waged not with bullets, but with fear, not with armies, but with shadows and sounds, and the terrible power of belief. Cyrus Blackwell wanted their land. He thought he could take it with papers and power. But he was about to learn that there were older powers in this territory than white man's law. Powers that remembered when the land was free, when honor mattered more than gold, and when those who protected the weak were considered warriors worthy of respect. Tonight the Apache Guardian would begin his work, and Emma Sullivan, age 9, orphan and heir to a gold mine she couldn't work, would become something her father never imagined, a storyteller whose tales would terrify grown men and defend what law could not protect. The game was truly beginning now, and for the first time since her father died, Emma felt something besides fear and despair. She felt hope. Judge Morrison's ruling came down at noon, exactly as Neshoba had predicted. Emma and Thomas weren't present for the hearing. Children had no standing in such matters, but Reverend Hartwell came to tell them the news that afternoon, his face lined with regret. "I'm sorry, Emma. The judge ruled that your father's debt was legitimate and that Blackwell has the right to claim the land in satisfaction of what's owed. You have until the end of the week to vacate the cabin." The Reverend reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. "Blackwell sent this. He says it's enough for stage fare to Kansas City, where you can seek placement with a church orphanage." Emma took the money with numb fingers. $40, the price of her father's dream, of the gold waiting in the eastern shaft, of everything her parents had worked for. "Thank you for coming to tell us, Reverend. Is there anything I can do? Anywhere you can go. We'll figure something out," Emma said, though she had no idea what that might be beyond Neshoba's plan. "Thank you for your kindness." After Hartwell left, Thomas looked up at her with frightened eyes. "Are we really going to leave?" "No," Emma said firmly. "We're going to fight, just like we planned." That evening, Emma made her first move. She walked into town with Thomas, heading for the general store where she knew people would be gathered. The store owner, Mr. Aldrich, looked up from his counter with barely concealed hostility. She still owed him money her father had charged. "I can't extend any more credit," he said before she could speak. "I'm not here for credit," Emma replied, loud enough that the other customers could hear. "I came to warn people. There's something on our land, something dangerous. My father knew about it before he died. That's why he kept working the claim even when everyone said it was worthless." She had their attention now. A woman sorting through fabric paused. Two men discussing horses turned to listen. Mr. Aldrich frowned. "What are you talking about, girl?" "An Apache medicine man came to our father before he got sick, told him the land was sacred to his people, that there were old burial grounds there. Papa didn't want to disrespect the dead, so he made an agreement. He could work the land, but only if he honored the spirits that protected it, and anyone who tried to take it dishonestly would face terrible consequences." It was a good story, Emma thought. Close enough to truth to be convincing. There was indeed an Apache presence on the land now, but wrapped in supernatural elements that would appeal to settlers' superstitions. "That's ridiculous," Mr. Aldrich said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "There's no such thing as—" "Papa didn't think so either at first," Emma interrupted, but then strange things started happening. Tools that moved by themselves, sounds in the night like chanting. He saw symbols carved into rocks near the mine, symbols that weren't there before. He wrote about it in his journal. She pulled out her father's journal and opened it to a page where Patrick Sullivan had indeed sketched some rock formations. In the margin, Emma had carefully added her own note in similar handwriting. "The Apache warnings continue. Must respect the covenant." It was forgery, technically, but for a good cause. "Why didn't he mention this before?" asked one of the men, a rancher named Cooper. "He was afraid people would think he was crazy, or that they'd try to take the land anyway and get themselves killed. But now that he's gone and Mr. Blackwell has claimed it, I thought people should know. Mr. Blackwell's men are going to start working that mine, and if they don't respect the covenant—" Emma let the sentence hang, ominous and unfinished. "This is nonsense, Mr. Hildrich declared, but Emma could see others weren't so sure. Settlers in the territory had an uneasy relationship with the Apache. Even 3 years after most tribes had been forced onto reservations, stories circulated of curses and revenge, of warriors who could move like ghosts and strike without warning. "Believe what you want," Emma said, tucking the journal back into her coat. "I just thought people should know. Come on, Tommy." As they left the store, Emma heard the buzz of conversation erupt behind them. The seed was planted. Now it just needed time to grow, and Neshoba's help to make it bloom into full terror. That night, Neshoba began his campaign. Blackwell had left 2 men to guard the mine, Marcus, the younger gunman with nervous hands, and another hard case named Dalton. They'd set up a simple camp near the entrance, built a fire, and settled in for what they thought would be a routine night of keeping squatters or claim jumpers away. What they got instead was a lesson in Apache psychological warfare. It started just after midnight. Marcus was on watch while Dalton slept, his rifle across his knees and his attention drifting. The fire had burned down to embers, casting strange shadows across the hillside. That's when the sounds began. First, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat, echoing from somewhere in the darkness. Marcus straightened, gripping his rifle. "Dalton!" he hissed. "You hear that?" Dalton jerked awake, reaching for his gun. "Hear what?" The thumping stopped. Silence stretched out, broken only by the wind. Then came a sound that made both men's blood run cold, a high, wailing cry that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling in a pattern that felt ancient and angry. "Jesus Christ," Dalton whispered. "What is that?" Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at the mine entrance where something was moving in the darkness. No, not moving, materializing. symbols painted in some luminous substance that glowed faintly in the starlight, appearing on the rocks as if drawn by invisible hands. "There," Marcus pointed with a shaking hand. "Someone's up there." They saw him then, briefly, a figure standing on the ridge above, silhouetted against the stars. He held something that caught the faint light, something that might have been a spear or a ceremonial staff. For one frozen moment, the figure stood there, clearly visible. Then he was gone, vanished so completely, it was as if he'd never existed. "We should go," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "We should go right now." "Blackwell will kill us if we abandon our post," Dalton argued, but his own voice shook. They stayed, but neither slept again that night. The sounds continued sporadically. Sometimes the thumping, sometimes chanting in a language they didn't recognize. Once a scream that sounded like a woman in terrible pain. With dawn's light, they found more evidence of their night visitor. Their horses, which had been picketed 20 yards from camp, had been moved to the opposite side of the mine entrance without making a sound. Their saddles had been arranged in a circle around a pile of stones marked with red paint, and carved into the wooden supports of the mine entrance were fresh symbols that looked like warnings. When Blackwell arrived mid-morning with Slade and 2 other men, Marcus and Dalton were packing up their gear with shaking hands. "What the hell are you doing?" Blackwell demanded. "We're done," Dalton said flatly. "You want someone to watch this mine? You do it yourself. I ain't staying another night. You're scared of some noises in the dark?" "You weren't there," Marcus said. "You didn't see him. That Apache ghost the Sullivan girl talked about, he's real, and he ain't happy about you taking this land." Blackwell's face darkened. "There's no such thing as ghosts. It was probably just some drunk from town playing tricks." "Yeah?" Dalton pointed at the symbols carved into the mine entrance. "Those weren't there yesterday, and they're fresh. Someone came into our camp while we were awake and armed, moved our horses without waking them, and we never saw or heard a damn thing until he wanted us to. That ain't natural, Blackwell. That's Apache medicine, and I want no part of it." The 2 men rode off before Blackwell could stop them, leaving him with Slade and the others. Emma, watching from a concealed position that Neshoba had shown her the night before, saw Blackwell's confident expression crack slightly. He was trying to rationalize what his men had reported, trying to maintain his certainty that this was all tricks and coincidence. But over the next 3 days, that certainty eroded like soil in a flood. Blackwell brought in new men to guard the mine, but they fared no better. One woke to find his rifle disassembled, the parts arranged in a pattern on the ground beside him, with no memory of sleeping so soundly he wouldn't have noticed. Another swore he saw a warrior standing in the mine entrance at dawn, watching him with eyes that glowed like coals, only to have the figure vanish when he blinked. In town, Emma's story spread and grew with each retelling. The Sullivan claim was cursed, people said. Patrick Sullivan had disturbed sacred ground, and now his land was protected by Apache spirits. Anyone who tried to work the mine would face terrible consequences. Some versions of the tale claimed the Apache medicine man had raised Patrick's ghost to guard the claim. Others said the land itself was alive with ancient power. Blackwell tried to dismiss it all as superstition, but his actions showed his growing concern. He doubled the guards at the mine. He brought in men from Silver Creek who hadn't heard the stories. He even consulted with Judge Morrison about whether there were legal protections against supernatural threats, a conversation that left the judge questioning Blackwell's sanity. Meanwhile, Neshoba continued his campaign with ruthless efficiency. He was a ghost, a shadow, appearing and disappearing at will. He left signs of his presence but was never caught or even clearly seen. He made sounds that human throats shouldn't have been able to produce. He created coincidences that seemed impossible. A guard's water that tasted like blood, food coloring from a general store, Neshoba had explained, a horse that threw its rider at the exact moment a strange bird cry echoed from the hills, tools that snapped or broke at improbable times. It was theater, Emma understood, psychological manipulation designed to exploit fear and superstition. But it was working. Blackwell's men were deserting. The ones who remained were nervous, jumpy, prone to seeing threats in every shadow. On the 4th night after Judge Morrison's ruling, everything came to a head. Blackwell had decided to work the mine himself, along with Slade and one loyal man named Parker, who needed the money badly enough to ignore his fear. They entered the shaft with picks and lanterns, determined to extract enough gold to prove the claim's value and justify their efforts. They were inside for perhaps 20 minutes when the lanterns went out simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. "What the hell?" Blackwell's voice echoed in the confined space. Then came the sounds, thumping, like war drums, reverberating through the mine shaft. Chanting in Apache, the words unintelligible but the tone clearly hostile. And beneath it all a rhythmic scraping sound, like someone dragging a blade across stone, getting closer and closer to where they stood in the dark. "Get out!" Parker screamed, and bolted for the entrance. Slade followed, his nerve finally breaking. That left Blackwell alone in the darkness, with whatever was making those sounds. Emma, watching from outside with Thomas, saw the instant Blackwell's courage failed. He came stumbling out of the mine, his face pale in the starlight, his hands shaking. Nashoba emerged from the mine entrance behind him, walking slowly, a burning brand in one hand that cast his face in demonic shadows. He'd painted his face with white clay, making him look skeletal, otherworldly. He raised the brand above his head and spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the hillside with commanding power. Emma didn't understand the words, but she understood the message. "This land is not yours. Leave or face consequences." Blackwell stared at Nashoba for one frozen moment, and in that moment, Emma saw the man's certainty shatter completely. This wasn't a ghost or a spirit. This was a real Apache warrior, which was somehow more terrifying than any supernatural threat. Real meant dangerous. Real meant arrows in the dark and a knife across the throat. Real meant war. "Slade," Blackwell said quietly, his eyes never leaving Nashoba. "We're leaving." "But the mine," Slade protested. "I said we're leaving now." They rode away at speed, not bothering with their equipment or supplies. From the ridge above, Emma watched them go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and triumph. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Nashoba extinguished his brand and climbed up to where Emma and Thomas waited. In the darkness, he wiped the clay from his face with a cloth, becoming himself again rather than the terrifying apparition he'd created. "It's over?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "Maybe," Nashoba said cautiously. "Blackwell is scared now. He will think hard before coming back, but scared men are dangerous. They do unpredictable things." He was right to be cautious. The next day, Blackwell made his move, but not the move they'd expected. Instead of returning to the mine, he went to the territorial marshal in Silver Creek with a story about a renegade Apache attacking his men and threatening the peace of Redemption Bend. Reverend Hartwell brought Emma the news, his face grave. "The marshal is coming with soldiers, Emma. Blackwell convinced him there's a dangerous Apache in the area, possibly the same one wanted for those killings last spring. They'll search the hills, and if they find him—" "There's no one to find," Emma said, her heart sinking. "It was just tricks, Reverend. Stories to scare Mr. Blackwell away." But Hartwell looked at her with knowing eyes. "Emma, I'm not a fool. I've seen moccasin tracks near your cabin. I've heard too many specific details in the stories people tell, and I know that you and Thomas couldn't have orchestrated everything that's been happening." He paused. "If there is an Apache helping you, you need to warn him. The marshal is bringing a tracker, a man who knows these hills. If your friend is still here when they arrive tomorrow, they will find him." Emma felt panic rise in her chest. "What do I do?" "I don't know, child. I truly don't know." Hartwell looked torn between duty and compassion. "But I can give you tonight. I won't tell anyone what I suspect until morning. Use that time however you need to." After he left, Emma knew what she had to do. She tied a white cloth to the porch post, the signal for urgent need, and waited. Nashoba appeared within the hour, materializing from the darkness as silently as always. "They're coming," Emma told him quickly. "Soldiers and a tracker. Tomorrow morning. Blackwell told them you're dangerous, that you're wanted for murder. You need to leave. Go far away before they find you." Nashoba listened calmly, his face unreadable. "If I leave, Blackwell will come back. He will take your land. Everything we have done will be for nothing. But if you stay, they'll kill you or send you to the reservation." "Perhaps." Nashoba knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. "I told you once that some things are worth fighting for. I meant that. I also told you that you are more valuable than gold or land. That is also true. If staying means I am caught but you and Thomas are protected, that is a trade I will make." "No," Emma said fiercely. "You've already lost your family. I won't let you be taken because of us." Thomas, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "We could come with you. We could leave the land and go with Nashoba. Be like a family." Nashoba's expression softened with such profound sadness that Emma felt her heart break. "Little one, I cannot give you the life you deserve. I am hunted, always moving, always hiding. No schools, no safety, no future. Your sister knows this. That is not the life your father wanted for you. Then what do we do? Emma demanded, tears streaming down her face now. We can't lose you. You're all we have. Neshoba pulled both children into an embrace, holding them close. Listen to me carefully. Tomorrow when the soldiers come, you will tell them the truth. Tell them everything about your father's gold, about Blackwell trying to steal your claim, about the Apache warrior who helped you. Tell them I am not the man they seek, that I harmed no one, only scared greedy men away from children's land. They won't believe us, Emma sobbed. They'll think we're lying to protect you. Maybe. But there is one man who can tell them the truth. Reverend Hartwell has seen, has understood. He is a good man, respected. If he vouches for you, explains what happened, they may listen. Neshoba released them and stood. And I will help them listen by doing something I have not done in 3 years. I will surrender. What? Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. If I surrender peacefully, show them I am no threat. Tell them my story, they may show mercy. If I run and they catch me, they will shoot me or hang me. This way there is a chance, small maybe, but a chance. They'll send you to the reservation, Emma whispered. Perhaps, but at least I will be alive, and someday, if the spirits are kind, I may see you again. You can write letters, yes? Tell me how you and Thomas are managing with your father's gold mine. Tell me what you buy with the money, where you go, what you learn. That will be enough. He pulled out the small carved doll that had belonged to his daughter, the one Emma had seen that first night in the cabin. He pressed it into Emma's hand. Keep this. Remember that protecting you gave my life meaning again. Remember that honor matters more than power, and that courage sometimes means surrendering rather than fighting. Emma clutched the tiny doll, unable to speak through her tears. Thomas was crying too, holding onto Neshoba's leg like he might physically prevent him from leaving. Be brave, Neshoba told them. Be honest tomorrow. Tell them everything. And trust that sometimes the truth is powerful enough to change hearts, even hearts made hard by fear and prejudice. The next morning, when Marshal Donovan arrived with 6 soldiers and a grizzled tracker, Emma and Thomas were waiting on their porch with Reverend Hartwell beside them. Before the marshal could begin his search, Emma stepped forward. I know where the Apache is, she said clearly. I know because he's been helping us, and I want to tell you the whole story. She did exactly as Neshoba had instructed. She held nothing back. The gold in her father's mine, Blackwell's fraudulent debt claim, Judge Morrison's biased ruling, Neshoba's campaign to scare Blackwell away. She showed them her father's journal, the map Neshoba had drawn, the carved toys. Reverend Hartwell corroborated her story, explaining what he'd observed and why he believed the Apache warrior meant no harm. He lost his family to soldiers 3 years ago, Emma said, looking directly at Marshal Donovan. His wife and 2 children, killed when their village was cleared. He's been living alone since then, hurting no one. He only helped us because we reminded him of his children. He protected us when no one else would. Marshal Donovan was a career lawman in his 50s with hard eyes that had seen too much violence. But as Emma spoke, something in those eyes shifted. When she finished, he looked at Reverend Hartwell. You believe this story? Every word, Hartwell said firmly. These children were being robbed, Marshal. Legally, perhaps, but robbed nonetheless. And the Apache warrior they described did nothing but defend them. If that's a crime, then we've lost sight of what justice means. The marshal turned to his men. Spread out. Search the hills. But listen careful. If you find this Apache, you take him alive and unharmed. No shooting unless he attacks first, which I'm betting he won't. It took 2 hours, but they found him. Neshoba was sitting on a rock outcropping near Patrick Sullivan's grave, clearly visible, making no attempt to hide. He'd washed the clay from his face and wore his simple buckskin clothing. When the soldiers approached, he stood slowly, hands visible and empty, and spoke in clear English. I am Neshoba of the Chiricahua. I surrender myself to your authority. I have harmed no one and committed no crime but being Apache and free. If I must go to the reservation to save these children's land, I will go peacefully. They brought him down in shackles, though the marshal ordered them loose enough not to hurt. Emma and Thomas ran to him, and the soldiers didn't stop them. Emma pressed the small doll back into his hands. Keep it, she said, so you remember we're waiting for letters. So you remember you have to survive and come back someday. Neshoba closed his fingers around the doll, his eyes wet. I will remember, and you will remember what I taught you, that honor matters, that protecting the weak is what makes us strong, that courage comes in many forms. Marshal Donovan cleared his throat. I need to speak with Judge Morrison about this situation, and with this Blackwell character. If half of what these children say is true, there's been a miscarriage of justice. He looked at Neshoba. You'll come to Silver Creek with us, but I'll make sure you're treated fairly. That's all I can promise. That is more than I expected, Neshoba said quietly. It is enough. As they prepared to leave, Cyrus Blackwell came riding up with Slade and 2 other men, clearly having heard that the Apache had been captured. Marshal, I want that savage tried for terrorizing my men and threatening. Mr. Blackwell, Marshal Donovan interrupted coldly, I'm going to need you to explain something to me. These children say their father found a substantial gold vein in his claim. They say you knew about it and manufactured a debt to steal their land. They have evidence in his journal and the mine itself. Now, if they're lying, that's one thing. But if they're telling the truth, then we're talking about fraud and theft from orphans. So before you start making demands about charging anyone with crimes, maybe you want to reconsider your position. Blackwell's face went white. I have a legitimate debt. Judge Morrison ruled based on the information you gave him. But I'm the territorial marshal, and I answer to higher authority than county judges. And I'm inclined to investigate whether everything was as legitimate as you claim. Donovan's voice was ice. We're going to take a look at that mine, and then we're going to have a long conversation about your business practices. They all rode to the mine together. Marshall, soldiers, Blackwell's men, Neshoba still in shackles, and Emma and Thomas following on an old mule the Reverend had loaned them. At the mine entrance, Marshal Donovan ordered torches lit and went inside with his sergeant and 2 soldiers. Emma waited, holding Thomas's hand, hoping her father's discovery was as significant as his journal suggested. They emerged 15 minutes later, and the marshal's expression had changed completely. There's a vein in there that would take an experienced prospector maybe a year to work out completely. Value, I'd estimate, between $25,000 and $40,000. Maybe more if it runs deeper. He turned to Blackwell. That's what you were after, isn't it? That's why you pushed that debt claim so hard. You knew Patrick Sullivan had finally found something real. The debt is legitimate, Blackwell stammered. I got papers. I'm sure you do, and I'm equally sure a judge in Silver Creek is going to want to examine them very carefully, along with examining why you didn't mention the gold when you filed your claim. That seems like information a court should have had, don't it? Marshal Donovan turned to his sergeant. Escort Mr. Blackwell and his men to Silver Creek. They're going to be guests of the territorial court until we sort this out. Over the next week, everything changed. Judge Morrison, faced with the marshal's investigation and the possibility of his own complicity being examined, reversed his ruling. The Sullivan claim was returned to Emma and Thomas, free and clear of Blackwell's debt. An investigation revealed that Blackwell had indeed forged some of the debt documents, and he was arrested on fraud charges. More surprisingly, Marshal Donovan used his authority to speak on Neshoba's behalf. In depositions, Emma, Thomas, Reverend Hartwell, and even some of Blackwell's former men testified about what had happened. The Apache warrior had harmed no one, had merely protected children using the same kinds of tactics soldiers used in war: intimidation, deception, psychological manipulation. He was a veteran defending civilians. Marshal Donovan argued to the military tribunal that had been convened, and he did it without shedding a drop of blood. Seems to me that shows more discipline than half the soldiers I know. The tribunal deliberated for 2 days. In the end, they ruled that Neshoba would not be charged with any crime, but neither could he remain free in the territory. He would be escorted to the reservation at San Carlos, where he would be required to stay, unless granted specific permission to leave. On the day before he left, they allowed him one final visit to the Sullivan cabin. Emma had used some of the money the territorial government had advanced against future gold extraction to buy supplies and make repairs. The cabin was warmer now, better stocked, almost comfortable. It looked like a place where children might actually survive the winter. Neshoba walked through it slowly, touching the walls, the fixed roof, the well-stocked shelves. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. You fought for what was yours and you won. We won because of you, Emma said. We'd have lost everything if you hadn't helped us. No, you would have found another way. You have your father's courage and your mother's wisdom. That is a powerful combination. He knelt down and pulled Thomas into a hug, then Emma. Listen to me carefully. The gold in that mine is real, but working it will be hard. You will need help. Adults who know mining and can protect you from others like Blackwell who will try to take it. Reverend Hartwell has agreed to be your guardian until you are old enough to manage alone. Trust him. He is a good man. I'll write to you, Emma promised. Every month I'll tell you everything, what we're doing, how we're managing, all of it. And I will read every word. Neshoba reached into his pouch and pulled out one last carving. It showed 3 figures, 2 children and an Apache warrior, standing together on a hill. Keep this. Remember that family is not always blood. Sometimes it is the people who choose to stand beside you when standing beside you costs them everything. The next morning he rode away with the soldiers, heading south toward the reservation. Emma and Thomas stood on their porch and watched until he was a tiny speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. 2 months later, Emma received her first letter back. It was written in careful English, the handwriting improving from his earlier notes. Dear Emma and Thomas, I am at San Carlos. It is hard here, but I am alive and have found some of my distant relatives among the people. They remember my family. This brings both pain and comfort. Your letter told me you extracted $400 in gold last month with the help of the mining engineer Reverend Hartwell hired. This is good. You are building a future. I am proud of you. I think often of the nights I watched over your cabin, of fixing Thomas's wooden horse, of the fear in Blackwell's eyes when he realized he could not defeat 2 children and an Apache warrior. These memories make me smile, which is something I did not think I would do again after losing Ayana and my children. You gave me back my purpose. You reminded me that life continues even after terrible loss, and that protecting the innocent is its own reward. Be brave, be wise. Honor your father's memory by living well and treating others with kindness. That is the greatest revenge against those who thought you would fail. Your friend always, Neshoba. Emma folded the letter carefully and placed it in the wooden box where she kept her most precious possessions, her mother's locket, her father's journal, and the small carved doll that had belonged to a daughter who died too young. Outside, Thomas was playing near the mine entrance, now safely reinforced with new timbers paid for with Sullivan gold. Reverend Hartwell was in town, negotiating with a smelter about processing rates. The cabin was warm, the shelves were full, and for the first time since her father died, Emma allowed herself to feel something like hope. They had survived. More than survived, they had fought and won, not with guns or armies, but with courage and cunning, and an unlikely alliance that transcended the boundaries white settlers had tried to draw between peoples. Emma looked toward the southern horizon, toward the distant reservation where Neshoba lived his constrained life. She hoped he could feel her gratitude across the miles, could sense that he'd achieved what he'd set out to do. He'd protected 2 children who reminded him of his own. He'd given them a future when they had none, and in doing so, he'd saved himself, not from death but from the emptiness that had haunted him since that terrible day 3 years ago when he'd returned to his village to find everyone he loved dead. Emma picked up her pen and began a new letter. She would tell him about the engineer's progress, about Thomas's excitement over striking a new vein, about Reverend Hartwell's kindness and the town's slowly shifting attitude toward them now that they had money and prospects. But most of all, she would tell him the truth, that he was family now, connected to them by bonds stronger than blood. That 2 white orphans and an Apache warrior had created something the territory's bitter history said was impossible, a genuine connection built on mutual respect and shared struggle. The winter wind still blew cold across the New Mexico territory. Men still fought over land and gold. The scars of war and displacement still marked the landscape and the people. But in one small cabin on a formerly worthless claim, 2 children slept peacefully under blankets and a deerskin that smelled faintly of sage and smoke. They dreamed of wolves running free across hills that remembered when the land belonged to everyone and no one. They dreamed of gold and futures and a man with sad eyes who'd given them back their lives. And somewhere far to the south, on a reservation that tried to break the spirit of its people, an Apache warrior read letters by lamplight and allowed himself to hope that perhaps protecting children who weren't his own was enough to honor the memory of the children who were. It would have to be enough, because it was everything. The story of Emma Sullivan, Thomas Sullivan, and Neshoba would be told for generations in Redemption Bend, usually in whispers, because it challenged too many of the certainties people use to justify the territory's brutal history. But it would be told nonetheless. And every time someone fixed a child's broken toy, or stood between the weak and the powerful, or chose honor over profit, they would be living proof that one Apache warrior's choice to protect rather than destroy had changed. More than 2 children's lives. It had changed what was possible, and sometimes that's all courage needs to do.